Before the world knew his name, before the belts, before the cameras followed his every move, there was a quieter version of Muhammad Ali, a young man still figuring out who he was, still believing love was simple, still unaware of how heavy success can become. We often think fame changes everything, but what it really does is separate people onto different timelines. One person moves forward under lights and applause. The other keeps living quietly, unnoticed, unprotected by legacy. And years later, when those paths cross again, the shock isn't in what Sips found. It sets in what time is taken. This story begins long before championships, long before the world asked Ali to be larger than life. It begins with first love, the kind that forms before ambition hardens you, before choices become irreversible, before life asks you to become someone else. And first love is strange that way. It doesn't always stay. It doesn't always survive distance, growth, or change, but it leaves an imprint, one that success cannot erase. 26 years passed. In that time, Ali became a global symbol. His name echoed everywhere. His face became history. But while the world watched his rise, another life unfolded away from the spotlight. A life shaped by different pressures, different sacrifices, different kinds of strength. When Ali found his first love again after all those years, he wasn't meeting a memory. He was meeting reality. And reality is rarely romantic. It sits complicated. It sits uneven. It carries wounds that fame can heal, and lessons success can teach. This wasn't a reunion meant to reopen old feelings. It wasn't about regret or longing. It was about perspective. About understanding how far two people can travel from the same starting point. What Ali discovered in that moment wasn't said about her alone. It was about time, about choice, about the quiet cost of becoming who you are meant to be. And that discovery stayed with him, not because it broke his heart, but because it softened it. Stay with this story, because what happened when Muhammad Ali found his first love again wasn't that dramatic. It was human, and sometimes the most powerful lessons arrive without noise at all. Before the world knew him as a champion, before cameras followed his every step, before crowds learned to chant his name, there was a quieter life unfolding. A life without scripts, expectations, or pressure. That was where the memory began, and it never truly left him. In those early days, love arrived without calculation. There were no futures to manage, no reputations to protect, no schedules packed with obligations, just time, emotion, and sincerity. First love doesn't ask permission to stay. It simply takes root. For Muhammad Ali, that love formed before the world demanded he become larger than himself, before confidence turned into armor, before strength became something people expected instead of admired. It was love experienced as a human being, not a public figure. And that distinction mattered more than he realized at the time, because memories formed before identity hardens tend to linger longest. As life accelerated, the memory didn't vanish. It receded into the background, quiet but persistent. Success has a way of covering old chapters without erasing them. The noise of achievement can drown reflection for years. But silence always finds its way back in. And when it does, memories resurface. There were moments, late and unguarded, when that memory returned without invitation. Not as regret, not as longing, but as recognition of who he once was. That earlier version of himself still lives somewhere beneath the fame. And first love was the clearest reminder of it. He rarely spoke about it publicly, not because it lacked importance, but because it belonged to a part of life untouched by applause. Some memories lose meaning when shared too widely. They aren't meant for performance. They are meant for reflection. This was one of those. Time passed, and the world kept moving forward. Championships came and went. Losses followed victories. Public opinion shifted endlessly. But the memory remained strangely unchanged. It didn't age the way everything else did. It stayed suspended, preserved by distance. That is the nature of first love. It doesn't compete with later experiences. It exists outside comparison. It isn't measured against success or failure. It simply marks the beginning of emotional awareness. The first time care extends beyond yourself. And beginnings have a way of anchoring us. There were many relationships after, Many chapters written, but none replaced that initial imprint. They added to the story, but they didn't set overwrite the opening lines. First love doesn't demand permanence to remain significant. Its power comes from timing, not duration. As the years added weight and wisdom, that memory became less about the person and more about the moment in life it represented. A time when choices felt open, when identity was still forming, when the future hadn't set narrowed yet. Remembering her meant remembering possibility. He understood that memory differently as he aged. Not as something to revisit, but as something that explained him. Why certain emotions landed deeper. Why simplicity still mattered. Why success never fully replaced connection. The memory carried answers, not questions. It was never about holding on to the past. It was about understanding it. The memory served as a quiet reference point. A reminder of emotional honesty before complexity, of connection before consequence, of affection without conditions. Those reminders grounded him more than fame ever could. Even during his busiest years, when life felt relentless, that memory surfaced in unexpected ways. In moments of pause, in private reflection, in the contrast between public life and inner life, it became a touchstone, not an escape. He didn't set idealize it. He didn't set romanticize what was lost. He simply respected what had been. Respect allows memory to remain healthy. It keeps it from becoming obsession. This memory stayed intact because it was allowed to exist quietly, untouched by fantasy or regret. As decades passed, the memory evolved into something calmer, less emotional, more reflective. It became a symbol of origin rather than destination. Where he began, not where he needed to return. That distinction kept it from weighing him down. The world often assumes powerful men forget their beginnings, that success erases early vulnerability. But vulnerability doesn't sit vanish. It adapts, it hides beneath strength. This memory carried that vulnerability forward through every transformation. It reminded him he was human before he was iconic. There were times he wondered about her life, not with longing, but with curiosity. How time had shaped her. What paths she had taken, what life looked like without the noise he carried. Those thoughts were gentle, not intrusive. He never chased the memory. He didn't set need to. It followed naturally, appearing when it had something to teach. Memories that endure usually do. They surface not to pull you backward, but to steady you where you stand. By the time their paths crossed again, the memory had already done its work. It had softened him, anchored him, reminded him of life beyond achievement. The reunion would reveal new truths, but the memory had prepared him to receive them. This is why the memory never left him. Not because it demanded attention, but because it offered understanding. It connected past to present without conflict. It reminded him that before he became a symbol, he was simply a man capable of care. And that truth stayed with him, quietly, for decades. Time does not simply pass. It reshapes. It rearranges priorities quietly while people are busy living. Years don't announce what they are taking or giving. They just move forward, altering lives in ways no one plans. 26 years is not a gap. It is a transformation. When those years unfolded, Muhammad Ali lived under a spotlight few could imagine. Every decision was magnified. Every mistake was remembered. Every success came with weight. Time for him moved fast, crowded with responsibility. Momentum replaced reflection. Life became something to manage, not just experience. For her, time moved differently. No cameras followed her growth. No crowds celebrated her milestones. Life unfolded privately, shaped by ordinary pressures. Work, responsibility, disappointment, endurance. Her strength developed without recognition. That difference mattered more than either of them realized. Time separates people not only by distance, but by environment. Ali Sip's years were loud, demanding, relentless. Hers were quieter, but no less heavy. Each path required resilience, just of a different kind. When people live under different pressures long enough, they become fluent in different languages of survival. Memory freezes people at the moment you last saw them, but time refuses to honor memory. It keeps moving, reshaping faces, beliefs, and expectations. Ali carried an image from youth. She carried her own version of him as well. Neither image had survived untouched. Reality rarely does. By the time they met again, they were no longer who they remembered. They were who life had required them to become. That realization arrived instantly. Not with shock, but with quiet recognition. Time had not preserved them. It had matured them. Alai understood this immediately. He didn't look for the past to reappear. He listened instead. Listening revealed what time had done more clearly than sight ever could. The years had given her experiences he had never known. Struggles that fame doesn't shield anyone from. Strength earned without applause. Time had also taken things. Ease. Simplicity. The illusion that love exists outside consequence. Both of them felt that loss in different ways. Time removes innocence first. What replaces it depends on the life you live. For Ollie, time had given perspective. Success had taught him that winning doesn't stop life from changing people. That achievement doesn't freeze moments worth keeping. That progress often demands leaving parts of yourself behind. Meeting her again forced him to confront that truth directly. Not painfully, honestly. She didn't represent what could have been. She represented what had been real. That distinction matters. Time turns what if into fiction, but it turns what was into foundation. Alai wasn't looking backward. He was understanding his starting point. Time also stripped the meaning of fantasy. There was no illusion left to protect, no imagined future to entertain. Just two adults, shaped by decades of decisions. That honesty prevented disappointment. It allowed acceptance to enter instead. Acceptance is something only time teaches properly. The gap between them wasn't emotional. It was experiential. They had lived different versions of adulthood, different risks, different sacrifices. That doesn't make one path better. It makes them incomparable. Time teaches that comparison is useless. Alai noticed how her strength showed differently now. Not in ambition, but in endurance. Not in dreams, but in survival. Time had carved resilience quietly into her life. That kind of strength commands respect, without asking for it. He also saw himself more clearly through her eyes. Not the icon, not the legend, but the young man she once knew. Time gave him that mirror. It reflected the distance between who he had been and who he had become. This is where time changes everything. It removes the need for answers. It replaces curiosity with understanding. Alai didn't need explanations. He didn't need closure. He needed clarity, and time delivered it without drama. The reunion wasn't about rekindling emotion. It was about reconciling reality. Time had already closed doors gently but firmly. What remained open was respect. Respect for lives fully lived in different directions. Respect for paths that no longer intersected. That respect is a mature gift of time. Time also teaches restraint. It tempers impulse. It quiets urgency. Ollie didn't rush the moment. He allowed it to be exactly what it was. No more, no less. That patience only comes with years. What changed wasn't to love. Love had already done its work decades ago. What changed was understanding. Understanding of how fragile beginnings are, how powerful timing is, how little control people truly have over outcomes. Time teaches humility better than failure ever could. There was no bitterness in the meeting, because bitterness requires expectation. Time had removed expectation long ago. What remained was acknowledgement. A recognition of shared history without ownership. That recognition was peaceful, not painful. Peace is another thing time refines. Ollie walked away different because of that clarity. Not heavier, not regretful, just more aware. Aware that some connections shape you permanently without needing to remain present. Time doesn't erase meaning. It redefines it. This is why time changed everything. Not because it destroyed something beautiful, but because it revealed what was real. It showed that first love isn't about possession or return. It's about origin. And origins don't need revisiting to remain important. They only need to be understood. By the end of that encounter, Alai wasn't thinking about the years lost. He was thinking about the years lived. Time had done what it always does best. It stripped illusion, preserved truth, and left behind a lesson neither of them could have learned sooner. What Ali discovered was not something dramatic. There was no shocking secret waiting to be revealed. No headline-worthy twist. What he encountered was far more sobering than that. It was the quiet truth of a life lived outside the spotlight. And quiet truths often land the hardest. When Muhammad Ali listened to her story, he wasn't set hearing about fame or celebration. He was hearing about endurance, about ordinary days that required strength without recognition, about responsibilities carried without applause. It reminded him that most courage in the world never makes the news. Her life had unfolded in a different rhythm. Not fast, not public, not protected by success. Time had tested her in subtle ways. Bills that needed paying, choices that couldn't be postponed, moments where resilience mattered more than ambition. That kind of strength doesn't announce itself. Ali noticed how composed she was. Not hardened, not bitter, just steady. There was a calm in her that came from surviving quietly. The kind of calm built from solving problems without help, from learning how to keep going when no one is watching. What surprised him most was not what she had lost, but what she had kept. Her sense of self hadn't disappeared. It had adapted. Life had reshaped her priorities, but it hadn't erased her dignity. That realization shifted something inside him. He had spent years being celebrated for greatness, for talent, for visibility, but here was a life defined by persistence instead of praise. It forced a comparison he had never needed to make before. Not between success and failure, but between recognition and resilience. Ali understood then that fame is a shield, but not a solution. It protects from some hardships, while amplifying others. Her life showed him a version of strength that fame never teaches. Strength that grows when you have no choice but to be strong. As she spoke, Ali listened more than he talked. That mattered. Listening allowed the truth to emerge without judgment. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't trying to compare lives. He was simply absorbing reality as it was. And reality rarely matches memory. He noticed the distance between expectation and truth. Not disappointment, clarity. The clarity that comes when fantasy dissolves. Time had removed the illusion of what might have been. What remained was respect for what was endured. That shift replaced nostalgia with understanding. Her story also showed him how uneven time can be. How two people can begin in the same place and end up shaped by entirely different pressures. Neither path was wrong. Neither was superior. They were simply human. That realization humbled him more than criticism ever had. Ali had always known struggle, but his struggles were visible, public, measured. Hers were quiet and continuous, unrecorded. No finish line. That contrast stayed with him. He realized then that life doesn't reward everyone equally. Effort doesn't guarantee ease. Love doesn't guarantee permanence. Beginnings don't promise outcomes. These truths aren't bitter. Desert grounding. And grounding truths mature the heart. What he discovered was perspective. Perspective strips ego gently but completely. It reminds you that success is one form of survival, not the only one. That endurance without recognition may require even more courage. That thought lingered long after the conversation ended. Ali also discovered something about himself. That the memory he carried wasn't about her alone. It was about the part of himself she represented. The man he was before pressure reshaped him. Seeing her life helped him locate that man again. Not to return, but to acknowledge. There was no regret in that acknowledgement. Regret implies a desire to undo. Ali didn't want to undo his life. He wanted to understand it more honestly. Her story offered that honesty. It placed his journey in a wider context. One where success didn't define worth. He saw how life demands different strengths from different people. Some are asked to rise, others are asked to endure. Both require courage, but endurance rarely receives validation. Ali left that meeting with renewed respect for the courage that goes unseen. What shocked him quietly was how little control anyone truly has. How love can begin purely and still be separated by timing, opportunity, and circumstance. Not because of failure, but because life doesn't ask permission when it changes course. That realization softened his judgments. He also discovered that closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from understanding limits. Understanding that some connections shape you without staying with you, and that this doesn't diminish their importance. It clarifies it. Her life wasn't tragic. It wasn't glamorous. It was real. And real lives rarely fit neat narratives. That truth dismantled any lingering romanticism. Romanticism can be comforting, but it prevents growth. Ali didn't leave the meeting heavy. He left lighter, because clarity removes unnecessary weight. He no longer carried unanswered questions. He carried perspective instead. Perspective doesn't pull you backward, it steadies you where you stand. This discovery changed him not by adding something new, but by removing illusion. Illusion about destiny, about control, about love as something fixed and guaranteed. What remained was acceptance. And acceptance is one of the hardest lessons time teaches. By the end of that conversation, Ali understood that first love doesn't owe you a future. It gives you a foundation, a reference point for sincerity, a reminder of who you were before complexity. That understanding reshaped how he viewed his own life, not with regret, but with gratitude. What he discovered was not about her alone. It was about life itself, how paths diverge, how strength shows up in different forms, and how some of the most meaningful lessons arrive decades late, exactly when you're finally ready to receive them. The shift didn't happen suddenly. There was no single sentence that altered everything, no dramatic pause or emotional confession. It happened quietly, in the space between listening and understanding. In the moment Ali realized this reunion wasn't about the past at all. It was about how the past reshapes you without asking. For Muhammad Ali, something settled internally. Not sadness, not regret, but awareness. The kind that arrives when you stop comparing outcomes and start recognizing meaning. He saw clearly that life hadn't been unfair. It had simply been different. He noticed how easy it would have been to romanticize what they once shared, to imagine alternative futures, to quietly question his own choices. But none of that happened, because maturity has a way of interrupting fantasy, and Ali had lived long enough to respect reality. What changed him was the absence of resentment. There was none in her voice, none in her posture, no bitterness waiting to be expressed. That absence struck him deeply. It meant she had made peace with her life, and peace is contagious. Ali realized how rare that is. Many people carry old relationships like unfinished business. They replay them endlessly, trying to renegotiate outcomes that no longer exist. She didn't do that. She spoke from acceptance, not longing. That acceptance reframed the entire meeting. He felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that the past didn't demand anything from him. Relief that no apologies were required. Relief that the connection could exist without obligation. That freedom allowed honesty to replace nostalgia, and honesty is far more grounding. This was the moment Ali stopped being a symbol, stopped being a champion, stopped being the man the world projected onto him. He was simply a listener, a witness to another human life. And witnessing without trying to fix or elevate is a form of humility. The meeting stripped away hierarchy. There was no success to compare, no achievements to weigh, no status to acknowledge. Just two people shaped by time, sitting with the reality of what was. That equality mattered more than anything said aloud. Ali understood then that love doesn't always mean return. Sometimes it means release. Release from expectation, from narrative, from the idea that meaning requires continuation. This realization changed how he held his memories. They became lighter, less demanding. He also saw how perspective evolves with age. In youth, love feels urgent. In maturity, it feels instructive. It teaches you what mattered before ambition took over, what grounded you before identity became complicated. That instruction is subtle but powerful. Ali felt its weight clearly in that moment. This reunion didn't reopen wounds. It closed a chapter gently, not by sealing it shut, but by placing it properly in the story of his life. First love was no longer a question mark. It was a period, complete, intact, respected. He noticed a quiet gratitude emerge. Not gratitude for what might have been, but for what had already shaped him. That early connection had taught him sincerity. It had shown him vulnerability before strength hardened him. It had reminded him of emotional honesty. That honesty stayed with him longer than he realized. Ali walked away internally changed, but not outwardly different. There was no visible transformation, no announcement, just a deeper calm, the kind that comes from resolving something without force. That calm followed him long after the meeting ended. What changed him most was understanding that timing is not a failure. That separation doesn't set means something was wrong. It simply means life required different things from different people. Accepting that truth removed the need to assign blame, and blame is often what keeps people trapped in the past. He realized that some connections exist to prepare you, not to stay with you. They teach you how to feel, how to trust, how to care. Once that lesson is learned, the connection has already done its work. Nothing more is required. This moment changed him because it replaced nostalgia with respect. Respect for her life, respect for his own journey, respect for time itself. Time had not stolen anything from him. It had clarified everything. By the time the meeting ended, Lee didn't feel emotional weight. He felt emotional alignment. His past made sense in a new way, not because it was revisited, but because it was finally understood, without distortion or longing. That understanding stayed with him, quietly, deeply. It didn't alter his public life. It altered how he carried his private one. And sometimes, that's the most profound change of all.